Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we have a really interesting set of sources.
Yeah, this one is particularly fascinating.
We've got some excerpts from the Jehovah's Witnesses online video library,
Okay.
a video file, and this was kind of mysterious. It's just titled JWB 120EELN 144P.3GP.
Interesting.
And then we have some website navigation. Just sort of seeing the breadcrumbs of how people are getting to this content.
Right.
But it looks like we are going to be peeking behind the curtain a little bit at the Jehovah's Witnesses, specifically their January 2025 broadcast.
It's a good time of year to be looking at this kind of material.
Yeah, what struck you about this particular broadcast?
Well, I think the timing is really interesting. January 2025
Mm-hmm.
gives us a snapshot of where the organization is at right now in terms of their priorities and their messaging.
Absolutely.
Huh?
One of the things that really jumped out at me was just the sheer number of personal stories that we're seeing, particularly people returning to the congregation after being disfellowshipped.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And that's not something that historically we've seen a lot of emphasis on.
No, not at all. I mean, disfellowshipping has always been a very weighty matter within the Jehovah's Witness community, often leading to estrangement from family and friends.
And that's got to be incredibly difficult.
Oh, absolutely. Heartbreaking in many cases.
So to see this shift towards a more, proactive approach to welcoming people back
Yeah, it's really striking.
is quite interesting.
It seems like they're really trying to emphasize mercy and forgiveness.
Right. And the stories themselves are so powerful. Like there's one about a deaf and blind man
Wow.
who returned after 45 years. And he just said, I just want to be back in the family,
Mm.
And then you see this young mother who is clearly struggling with something. And then as she starts talking about studying the Bible again, her face just lights up.
Right.
It's like this weight has been lifted.
Yeah, you can really see the impact that sense of belonging has on people.
Right. And that shared faith.
Right.
Right. That community.
Yeah.
It's obviously a very powerful draw, even for people who have been away for decades.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what those decades were like for them, carrying that sense of loss and separation.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And it's not always people who have been gone for a long time.
Yeah.
We see stories like this young man who watched the governing body update on this subject 6 times
Wow.
and was reinstated just a month later,
That's dedication.
right? And then there's this woman who had bought a service bag years ago, just waiting for the day that she could return to preaching.
Yeah.
It's like this quiet hope that's been simmering beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's almost like these people never truly left in their hearts,
Right, right. And it seems like there's a real concerted effort here, both from the individuals themselves reaching out
Mm-hmm.
and from the elders, actively seeking out those who have left.
Yeah, it's a two-way street for sure.
It is. It is. Okay, so we're seeing all these heartwarming stories about people returning, but then we have Brother Kenneth Cook's talk, help to tear down and to build up.
Right.
And he's talking about balancing Jehovah's mercy with his unwavering standards.
Yeah, that's an interesting juxtaposition.
Right. Does that suggest an internal conflict?
I don't think it's necessarily a conflict, but it definitely highlights a tension
Uh-huh.
that exists within the faith. How do you balance grace and accountability?
Right.
How do you show compassion without compromising on your core beliefs?
So it's not about lowering the bar,
No, not at all.
but it's about recognizing the role of mercy within a system that still upholds those standards.
Exactly. It's a nuanced approach.
Okay, so how does he try to convey that balance?
Well, he uses this really interesting analogy of an ice cream sundae.
Okay.
He says, just like a sundae needs all its key ingredients, the chocolate sauce, the whipped cream, the sprinkles, and of course the cherry on top.
Of course. You can't forget the cherry.
Exactly. Our love for righteousness and acts of justice should also include mercy whenever possible.
So mercy is the cherry on top.
Exactly. It completes the picture.
I love that analogy. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Okay, so if they're emphasizing mercy, now how does that square with situations that require discipline?
Well, that's where Cook brings in examples from the Bible, like Jesus cleansing the temple.
Right.
He points out that Jesus' actions were both a demonstration of his zeal for righteousness and his compassion for the people.
Mm.
He wasn't just throwing people out. He was clearing a space for genuine worship.
So sometimes tough love is necessary
Exactly. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do.
to protect the spiritual health of the community.
Right. It's not about being punitive. It's about maintaining the sanctity of the faith.
So Cook is connecting this to the need for elders to remove unrepentant wrongdoers from the congregation,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, be ready to welcome back and support those who repent.
Exactly. It's a two-pronged approach.
It is. It is. Okay, and then he brings up Zechariah's vision of that flying scroll.
Oh, yeah, that one always gives me chills.
Right, that imagery is so powerful.
A scroll containing a curse exposing wickedness, even tearing down the houses of those who steal and lie.
Yeah, and then there's that ephah container.
Right, with the woman representing wickedness trapped inside.
Right.
What's the takeaway there? Well, I think it highlights how Jehovah uses his angels to actively expose and remove wickedness. It suggests that divine forces are at work, ensuring that justice is ultimately served.
So it's not just about human judgment.
No, it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
There's a cosmic element to it.
It's almost like a supernatural audit.
Exactly.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, the Jehovah's Witnesses are being encouraged to treat wickedness in the same way, expose it, remove it from the congregation to maintain its spiritual health.
That's a good way to put it. They're tasked with being guardians of the faith, both through acts of mercy and acts of discipline.
It's a multifaceted responsibility.
It is.
Okay, so they're making a real effort to balance justice and mercy, both in terms of discipline and restoration.
Absolutely.
But what strikes you as most significant about this particular focus on those returning to the congregation? What's the bigger picture here?
Well, one thing that I find really fascinating is how these changes might reflect broader societal trends.
Oh, interesting.
We're seeing a growing emphasis on restorative justice, second chances, understanding the complexities of human behavior.
So you're saying that this shift within the Jehovah's Witnesses might be part of a larger cultural shift
Exactly.
towards a more nuanced view of accountability and forgiveness.
I think that's definitely a possibility. It's something to keep an eye on as we see how these trends continue to influence religious communities in the years to come.
Absolutely. Well, let's hold on to that thought for a moment and maybe come back to it later.
Yeah.
Because now we have to shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and dive into another core belief, everlasting life.
All right. Let's talk eternity.
Buckle up, everybody, because this is where things get really mind-bending.
I'm ready.
Me too.
So we've seen this really fascinating shift in how the Jehovah's Witnesses are approaching those who have left and then come back. But let's shift gears a little bit now and delve into another core belief, everlasting life.
Oh,
This is where Brother Let's Talk really comes into play.
right.
He tackles this head on. He addresses some of the common questions and anxieties people might have about living forever.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a topic that could bring up a lot of different emotions for people.
Absolutely. It's both exhilarating and maybe a little bit daunting.
Right. It is, for sure.
Hmm.
So where does he even begin? How do you start unpacking something as massive as everlasting life?
Well, he starts by laying the groundwork, the biblical foundation for this belief. He goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden.
Okay.
The implication is that death wasn't part of the original plan.
Interesting.
It was Adam and Eve's choice to eat from the tree of knowledge that introduced death into the human experience.
So it's not seen as a natural endpoint, but as a consequence?
Exactly. It's framed as a result of disobedience.
It really makes you think about how differently we might view life and death if we hadn't inherited that original sin.
That's a really profound point.
Yeah. So he starts with the biblical narrative. But does he bring in any other perspectives?
He does.
Yeah.
He actually brings in some really interesting scientific evidence,
Okay.
specifically focusing on the capacity of the human brain.
Okay.
He cites studies that estimate the average adult brain can store 2.5 million gigabytes of information.
2.5 million gigabytes. That's mind-blowing.
It is. To put that into perspective, that's like 17,000 times the storage capacity of the average smartphone.
Okay, so our brains are basically supercomputers.
Pretty much.
But what's the connection to everlasting life?
His argument is that this incredible storage capacity points to a design that goes beyond a mere 70 or 80 years of life.
I see.
If our brains are capable of holding so much information, wouldn't it make sense that they were intended for something more expansive?
Okay, so it's like he's saying our brains are these high-powered machines that are capable of running for much longer than our current lifespan allows.
Exactly.
And he brings up Jesus' baptism as an example, too.
Right. He does. He uses that moment when Jesus is baptized and experiences this flood of memories as further evidence of the brain's power. Imagine all those lifetimes of experiences and insights and emotions coming back in an instant.
Yeah, that would require a pretty remarkable hard drive.
For sure.
Okay, so I'm starting to see where he's going with this. But even if we accept that everlasting life is possible, wouldn't it get boring after a while? I mean, eternity is a long time.
That's a very human concern, and Let addresses it head on.
Okay, good. Because I was going to say, I think they'd get tired of playing harp after a few millennia.
Well, he actually tackles the idea that everyone would become identical if they were all perfect.
Okay.
But he points out that even today, people with no health issues have diverse personalities, preferences, talents.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you can have a room full of perfectly healthy people, and they'll still have wildly different opinions on everything.
Exactly. And he takes it a step further, using the example of identical twins.
Okay.
Even they, with the same genetic makeup, have subtle differences. You know, in their teeth, their freckles, their fingerprints. Individuality runs deep.
Okay, so perfect health doesn't equal cookie-cutter personalities. I get that.
Right.
But what about getting tired of doing the same things over and over?
Yeah.
Even if we have our own unique quirks, wouldn't we eventually run out of new experiences?
Well, Lecce uses a really interesting analogy here. He asks, is it boring to eat?
When you put it that way.
Most people eat 3 meals a day, year after year, and they don't get tired of it.
I guess a delicious meal is still a delicious meal, even if you've had it 1,000 times before.
Exactly. And he builds on this with the analogy of vacations.
Yeah.
You know, if you revisit a place that you loved, are you bored simply because you've been there before?
That's a good point. Sometimes revisiting a familiar place allows you to see it with fresh eyes. You notice things you missed before, and sometimes it deepens your appreciation.
Right. And let's be honest, some experiences never really get old.
That's true, like that first sip of coffee in the morning
Yeah.
or a breathtaking sunset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then to really drive home the point about endless variety, he turns to the vastness of creation itself. He points out that there are over 7,500 varieties of apples grown on Earth.
Wow. I had no idea.
Even if you sampled a new apple every single day, it would take you over 20 years to try them all.
Okay, that's a lot of apples.
And that's just apples, you know?
Right? Imagine all the other fruits.
Exactly. The point is, there's an inexhaustible well of experiences to draw from.
I'm starting to get a little overwhelmed just thinking about all the possibilities.
It's a lot to take in.
So, we wouldn't all turn into clones and we wouldn't be stuck doing the same things forever. But what about knowledge? Wouldn't we eventually learn everything there is to know?
That's a great question, and Let actually anticipates that. He refers back to Ecclesiastes 3.11.
Okay.
But this time he focuses on the phrase, mankind will never find out the work that the true God has made from start to finish.
So even with unlimited time, the mysteries of creation would never be fully exhausted.
That's the idea. He paints this picture of endless possibilities, you know. Imagine mastering every musical instrument, exploring all the galaxies, getting to know every single person who will ever live on Earth.
Okay, now my brain is officially starting to hurt.
It's a lot to process.
The possibilities are truly endless.
They are. And ultimately, Let emphasizes that we'll never stop learning about Jehovah himself. You know, throughout eternity, we'll continue to uncover more and more facets of our Creator.
That's a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
It reframes the whole concept of everlasting life, not as an endless loop, but as this continuous, ever-unfolding adventure.
Exactly. It's about embracing a mindset of continuous discovery and wonder.
So it's less about reaching a final destination and more about the journey itself.
Exactly.
Wow, okay. This is definitely making me think about everlasting life in a whole new way.
It's a powerful concept.
It is. It really is. But I think maybe we need to come back down to earth for a moment
Okay.
and explore another aspect of this broadcast, giving glory to Jehovah.
All right, let's do it.
Brother Splain's talk delves into this in a really interesting way, bringing in some musical elements as well.
I'm intrigued. Let's hear it.
All right, so we've talked about the Jehovah's Witnesses' focus on welcoming back former members, and we dove into those fascinating arguments for everlasting life. But now let's turn our attention to Brother Splain's talk, Give Jehovah Glory.
Okay.
And this talk really centers around the 2025 year text, Psalm 96.8.
Right.
It's interesting how this whole deep dive keeps coming back to the here and now.
Yeah.
You know, connecting those big eternal concepts back to the everyday lives of Jehovah's Witnesses.
It is. And Splain does a great job of that in his talk, I think.
Yeah. How so?
Well, he starts by giving us the historical context for Psalm 96.8. He explains that it comes from a song that David composed when the Ark of the Covenant was brought back to Jerusalem.
Oh, the Ark of the Covenant. Now, that's a pretty big deal.
It is huge.
I remember learning about it in Sunday school. But to be honest, it always felt a bit like this ancient artifact shrouded in mystery. Could you remind us why it was so significant?
Yeah, of course. So the Ark of the Covenant was considered the most sacred object in the tabernacle and then later the temple in Jerusalem. It represented God's presence among his people, and it served as this symbol of his covenant with them.
Right. So its return to Jerusalem after being captured by the Philistines must have been a really momentous occasion.
Oh, yeah. It was a time of immense joy and national pride.
I can only imagine.
And so David's song is really infused with this feeling of triumph and celebration. It's like this victory anthem for the return of God's presence.
I love that. It really sets the stage for Splain's exploration of this idea of giving glory to Jehovah.
Absolutely. And he breaks down the meaning of glory in a really straightforward way. He says it simply means anything that makes someone or something impressive.
I like that he keeps it nice and clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's a concept that could get really abstract and heady.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But he brings it down to earth.
Yeah.
And with that definition in mind, he goes on to outline different ways that individuals can give glory to God.
Okay.
And preaching is, of course, a primary method, sharing the good news about Jehovah with others.
Right. It's like they're acting as ambassadors.
Yeah.
Spreading the word and showcasing Jehovah's greatness to the world.
Exactly.
But Splain emphasizes that giving glory goes beyond just preaching.
Right. He does. He really does. He talks about the importance of acknowledging Jehovah's role in our own accomplishments.
Okay.
He uses the example of David, who said, "By God's power, I can scale a wall." It's a reminder that even our talents and abilities ultimately come from God.
It's about shifting that focus, from individual achievement to gratitude and humility.
Exactly. It's not about us. It's about him.
And then Splain takes it even a step further,
He does.
suggesting that sometimes we can give God glory without even saying a word.
Right. He uses the example of creation itself, the vastness of the heavens, the intricate design of nature.
Right.
He quotes the psalm that says, "There is no speech and there are no words, their voice is not heard, yet their expanse is declaring the glory of God."
Beautiful imagery. It's like the whole universe is this silent symphony praising its creator.
It is. And it makes you think about how often we take those wonders of nature for granted.
We do, for sure.
Yeah.
And then he connects this to our own conduct, right? Suggesting that living a good and upright life can also reflect God's glory.
Exactly. It's about embodying those values and principles in a way that inspires others.
It's like we become living examples,
Yeah.
of what it means to follow Jehovah.
Right. Our actions speak volumes.
Even if we never utter a word about our faith.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got preaching, we've got acknowledging God's role in our lives, we've got living an upright life. What else?
Well, then he shifts gears slightly and focuses on the importance of God's name, Jehovah,
Okay.
and encouraging witnesses to use it when they're talking with others.
Hmm.
He even suggests this really gentle approach, like asking people, would you like to see God's name in the Bible? It's not about forcing a belief, but just kind of sparking that curiosity.
I like that. It's very respectful.
Yeah.
And inviting
Yeah.
rather than confrontational.
It's
It's more about planting seeds than, forcing a particular outcome.
Right. And it ties back into that theme of giving Jehovah his due,
Yeah.
Acknowledging his rightful place as the sovereign of the universe.
And then Splain explains that many scholars believe that the name Jehovah actually means he causes to become.
Right.
And he connects that back to some of the earlier themes in the broadcast, like missionary work construction projects serving at Bethel.
Yeah, it's all tied together.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
Wow. So this talk isn't just about these abstract ideas about giving God glory.
Oh,
He's giving some very practical examples.
he is.
Okay, so what are some of those practical ways that Jehovah's Witnesses can express their devotion?
Well, this is where the music comes in.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
He shares a poem called Give Jehovah Glory.
Okay.
And it was written for a new song that was composed specifically for this annual meeting.
Wow. So they're creating original music now.
Yeah, it's really cool. And here's the really exciting part. This is just the beginning.
Okay.
Splain announces that from now on, each annual meeting will feature an original song based on the year text.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like they're establishing this new tradition, this musical thread that will run through their gatherings for years to come.
It's really powerful. And he mentions that this song will be released in over 400 languages.
Wow. That's incredible.
It speaks to the global reach of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And the power of music as this unifying force, transcend all those language barriers
Yeah.
and cultural differences.
It's a universal language.
It is. So this talk wasn't just about abstract ideas.
Mhm.
It was about giving Jehovah's Witnesses tangible and even artistic ways
Right.
to express their devotion.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that faith isn't just a set of beliefs,
Uh-huh.
but it's a lived experience that finds expression in all aspects of life.
Well said. Well, I think this deep dive has given us a really unique glimpse into the heart of the Jehovah's Witnesses' faith.
It has.
We've explored how their understanding of God
Mhm.
is evolving their hopes for the future, and their commitment to living in a way that honors their Creator.
Absolutely. It's been fascinating.
It has. And it really prompts us all to consider how our own beliefs shape our actions, our relationships, and ultimately our understanding of our place in the world.
That's something worth thinking about, no matter what your individual beliefs